There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. Today I have the distinct honor to have Nora Zimmett joining us today. Nora serves as the president of Original News for the Weather Group and is responsible for the overall editorial direction of the Weather Channel, television network, and Pattern, the network's brand dedicated to climate and the environment. Nora oversees all aspects of live programming on the Weather Channel television network. Prior to joining the Weather Channel, Nora served as co-creator and executive producer of the New Day Weekend and Smear Konish at CNN. During her CNN tenure, Nora received an Emmy Award for her work on the 2012 presidential election. Prior to her role at CNN, she held senior producer and producer roles at Bloomberg Television and Fox News Channel. Nora, thanks for joining us on the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
No, thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey and how that led you into your career in television and digital media?
Absolutely. A lot of the people that I work with, a lot of my friends in the industry knew they wanted to be broadcast journalists from a very young age. That was not my story. I was actually a professional actress for a few years during and after college. And while I was working and had jobs, I was very bored. I was very, very bored. I had come from a very academic background and a very brainy family, and I just wanted to do more. And I was willing to start at the bottom, and I kind of took a circuitous route as an associate producer at a network, freelance, thinking that I would do anything from, getting coffee to ripping scripts. But they gave me an opportunity really early on to have a much more hands-on experience. And I started moving up the ranks and became, ultimately, I became a field producer, which is really going out into stories, whether it be gathering interviews, doing the interviews yourself for, let's say, features, or being in the field for breaking news and events. And I fell in love with that. Ultimately, I shifted to the control room and then took more leadership roles until I ended up as an executive. And that has been a very different job. And it's a lot less, tactical work than it is leading others and making sure that you're helping them achieve the best that they can in their position.
Yeah. So has there been an event or two in your life that's really helped to kind of shape who you've become?
Yes. And I have found in my life that the events that have shaped me and taught me the most are not the successes. I will tell you that. I need to fail in order sometimes to get a really important lesson. I was a manager, sort of a mid-level manager in my career. This is a long time ago, long before I started the Weather Channel. And I really believed that being the smartest person in the room qualified you for being a leader. I thought having all the answers and, being the most well-read, the most educated was what got you to the next level. And I didn't appreciate that inspiring others, having a bedside manner, wanting other people to reach their full potential was a requirement. And I had an episode where I really lost my temper in a situation, and I said some extremely hurtful things. And I got in a lot of trouble, like a lot of trouble. And I remember finding out, I was sort of on a warning and thinking, I think I could have just ended my career myself. I think I may have just blown up my own career. And I couldn't understand how I was getting the right answer, right? I was getting the right answer on the test, as we do when we're students, and still failing. And it took some very intense coaching and, a journey beyond that. I did not lose my job, where I realized, it's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's not about getting the A on the test. It's not about having the best ratings. It's not about, being the most innovative. It's actually about leading others in the sense that, as I said earlier, they can do their jobs and they can be better. And that was a really pivotal moment in my career.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been there. Delivery is everything sometimes, especially when you're dealing with personnel issue or a negative interaction or conflict, and just depending upon how you present yourself and the interaction that you have with the other individual or individuals is as important as the facts at hand. Sometimes, most of the time.
So true.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
So what did you do? I just want to follow up a little bit on that. What did you do to, I guess, correct yourself, if you will, or to train yourself or to improve yourself after that happened?
Well, the first thing I did was make an extremely public apology. I don't mean public through the press or anything, but I apologized to my whole team, even people who weren't even there. And I am not someone who at all believes an apology absolves you. I believe in living amends. I believe in amending your behavior so that you don't end up having to be in that position again and making an apology, because apologies are hollow if you just continue the same behavior.
Yeah.
And I was able to get some coaching, and I was able to work with some people at the company to help me deal with conflict resolution in a way that was a lot more appropriate. And then I also started attaching myself to other leaders where I admired their bedside manner, where I admired how they manage stressful situations. I will tell you, it was a little confusing because I also saw leaders get promoted who were abusive in those situations and continued being abusive. They were older, they were male, I will tell you that. And I remember being confused because I heard and saw things that were at a way different tone and level than what I did and said. So I also think that was my first introduction into, sometimes it's not always, an even playing field, but that doesn't make my behavior any more okay. But I did try to, follow the examples of the people I admired the most and had the jobs that I ultimately wanted.
Yeah, I think really important. You have to walk your own talk, even if others aren't. And sometimes that's difficult because you're looking and you've got, maybe 2 or 3 people above you that, aren't acting appropriately, but they're the ones that are getting the nod, so to speak, and get promoted. And
it's true, but I will also say, as one mentor said to me, it's a very long life.
Yeah.
And fast forward well over a decade since the episode I'm telling you about, and those people have either left the industry or are finding it very difficult to get jobs because of their reputation.
Yeah.
And we really are only as good as our reputation, at least in my industry.
Yep. No, I think that's true in most. We have an old saying in the fire service: "What goes around comes around." So,
Right.
right. So
That's right.
So, what were some of the other challenges that you faced as you kind of began to move up through the organization or your organizations?
I really was under the impression that being the smartest, again, qualified you to do anything. And I learned through that episode and others that that's not the case. I didn't see early in my career any women that were in the top editorial positions that I wanted. They were taken by men. And I don't just mean in my organization, I meant across really the entire industry. And that was challenging because I didn't really understand then the way I do now that I didn't have a role model, if you will. I didn't have representation showing me that this is extremely achievable and it's a matter of putting the work in. So not having those mentors. I had some great male mentors and they were wonderful and they helped me, but I didn't have any women. And I think, that was probably more challenging now that I look back on it than I realized at the time. Mm-hmm. And then having a family, I was blessed enough to have my daughter in 2008. But it's very hard to have a baby and be globetrotting around the world 146 days a year. Yeah. I traveled to like 5 countries while I was pregnant with her. Wow. And something's got to give. Yeah. And I remember being very frustrated that I couldn't do both. And I wanted to do both so badly. And I ended up, that was my beginning of migrating away from field producing and working on a different part of the business. But that was really challenging. And I've since talked to a lot of women in the business, some who opt out or take time off, which is really not what I wanted to do. And some who make transitions the way I did, and some who say, I'm taking maternity leave and then I'm right back at it. And there is no wrong decision there. Yeah. But I think it is a lot more challenging for women to make those choices than men. Just still, as evolved as we are in 2024, there are still some very rooted beliefs in what the family unit should look like.
Yeah. Well, and I think from a male perspective, when you're not carrying the baby and, having all, because that's an extreme amount of work in and of itself. And, the bond for the baby and the mother are, I think, really, really special. And so it's just difficult, I think, for males to have a perspective of what you go through. And I don't think they have not only a perspective, but an appreciation for the challenges and the choices that you have to make as a mother.
I think that it really depends on who your partner is too. Sure. Whether your partner is a working man or woman, or if they're willing to stay at home, or if they have flexible time. I was very, very blessed to have a husband who is really 50-50 with me and has been from the jump. And I know that not everyone is as fortunate. I think there is a much higher tolerance today than there was 15, 16 years ago for having more men, let's say, stay at home. My husband's an attorney, but he happens to work from home. So I was very lucky.
Yeah. True. So what lessons would you like to share that as somebody that's just beginning their career and they've just taken that first step into their first leadership position? What are some of the things that you would share with them?
I really love sports movies and I love sports analogies. I don't play any team sports anymore, but I used to. And I really like talking about leadership and teams in terms of sports analogies. I think it's really helpful. I've heard a lot of people describe leaders as the quarterbacks of their teams, as the people who are calling the shots, making the decision, the play starts with them. I don't see it that way. I see leaders as, again, continuing with football, the offensive line. I see them as the centers, as the tackles, as the people who are clearing out the blockages, clearing the way and clearing the obstacles to allow the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the running backs drive the ball down the field. I really look at my job as being, cleanup crew, as being the lawnmower, the, road paver, so that my extremely talented team can be the best at their jobs and don't have to tackle every problem. I can just clear the way for them. If you're making them fight their every battle on their own, it's taking up valuable time that they could be doing for creating the program or coming up with a new innovation or, recruiting a new team member, like the things that they were really put in those positions to do. So I would say to leaders, there's this great book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Don't try to do your old job and your new job at the same time. That's not what your job is. And the higher you rise up the ladder in a leadership role, the more your job is about leadership.
Yeah.
Let the people who are in those skilled positions that you may have once been in do those jobs. And the best thing you can do is help them do those jobs by clearing the obstacles.
Yeah. No, that's really, really good advice. I remember the first fire chief job I took, and this was I moved across country to take this job. So I went from a field command officer to running an organization.
Wow.
But for the first 6 or 8 months, I was still trying to be the field commander.
That's right.
and not the fire chief, because
Yep.
that's what I knew. And you're exactly right. I mean, once you make that step, you have to kind of, I think, step back and take a more strategic view of how you can help your people do the best that they can do and be the best that they can be. And sometimes there's a transition period there, I think, for most people.
I will say that when I first became senior vice president over at the Weather Channel, I was still trying to read every script to proof it. And I had some very kind direct reports say, pretty sure this is not sustainable. And it took me a minute, but they were, of course, right. And even today, for major events like hurricanes, I try to sneak into the control room just to maybe once or twice add my 2 cents. And I have a very smart and savvy senior vice president now, Angie Massey, who's like, no, she just looks at me and shakes her head. Get out of there. Get out of there. You're making them nervous. Stop it.
Yeah.
And she's right. So I would add to my, blocking and tackling and sort of my other piece of my advice would be, hire people smarter than yourself.
Yeah.
Always hire people smarter than yourself. That is critical. I fear that a lot of leaders are afraid to do that because they're worried about their own jobs. And that is the absolute wrong way to look at leadership.
Yep. Yeah. You should be you're exactly right. You've got to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and that have diverse backgrounds. So that they're bringing different perspectives to your team. Because if you don't do that, you're going to have a myopic viewpoint and you're going to be where you're going to be. And you're never going to excel organizationally, or your people aren't going to excel either.
That's 100% right. I don't think there is one person on my team that I ever would have crossed paths with in high school.
Yeah.
Because not just like diversity in sort of the obvious ways, but diversity of geography, religion,
Hmm.
upbringing, socioeconomics. I wouldn't have known any of these people in high school. And thank God they are all in the organization now, because we have this perfect, quilt that allows us to innovate and do great television and protect and save lives, which is our mission,
Yeah.
because we're each bringing a little something from where we come from.
Yeah. Well, let's talk just a little bit about the Weather Channel and the mission of, protecting people throughout the world. You guys are doing a great job of reporting, not only before a storm, but during and after a storm. And I think you really bring the reality of what's happening on the ground. I know to everyone, and I think it gives everybody a perspective of how they can prepare better. And I know you spend a lot of time focused on taking lessons learned from those storms to try and impact folks to prepare for the next ones.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm not taking any credit because, again, my teams are the ones who are the smartest people in the room. And not only on the meteorology side, getting the forecast right and figuring out how to tell the future the best, but also on the journalism side, how to best tell the stories, and on the innovation and design side, how do we tell the future visually without using PowerPoint presentations, which is really the way weather's been told for 60 years, right, on TV. It's been such a pleasure and a different place to work because it's so mission driven.
Yeah.
To be a part of a news organization that has a mission to protect and save lives, and everybody really agrees with that. And if you ask anybody what the mission will be, I'm proud to say they can, just recite it right away. That is not something that I had in previous jobs. When we have a hard day at the office, people get hurt, When we have a good day at the office, everyone is protected, take shelter. The stakes are higher, and that feels very meaningful, and the pressure is real to get it right. But it is so gratifying. And while I don't know much about, the firefighting industry, the stakes are similar, with the difference that you all are putting yourselves in harm's way to save other Americans, obviously. But learning from either mistakes or learning from a specific storm as to how to predict it, forecast it better, that is always a part of what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. I think that you have a mission-driven organization, as is the fire and police services and military, and I think I think it lends itself to a different focus than many other occupations, and because there's a lot on the line, whether it's yourself personally or the people that you're there to protect. So. And you guys do a great job. I mean, I watch when those storms are coming through, and your reporters on the ground are some courageous folk.
They are. They're courageous, and they're scientists. Yeah. And we're really one of the only organization that have these unicorns who are scientists who know how to break down dense information to a non-scientific audience in a cogent, interesting way. Oh, and by the way, trees are falling all around their position. So it's, it takes a very special person, and we are blessed to have them.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it was a real pleasure. I got to interview Rick Knabb, and just really a special individual. But and I told him, I said, I always turn on the Weather Channel, and I always watch for you because you always put it in a perspective that I can understand.
Exactly.
Right?
And that is so hard to do. And having been at the Weather Channel for almost 10 years, we have interviewed and auditioned I mean, maybe 100, people, if they've even gotten to that stage. We're extremely selective, and I can't tell you how rare that talent is. And certainly Dr. Knapp is, has it in spades.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's shift gears just a little bit. I'd like to just get your perspective on what the current state of leadership is in our society today.
So I think it's always hard to paint any particular, job, role, et cetera, with a broad brush. But I will say that I am concerned that leaders in this country, from a broad perspective, and other countries, don't take responsibility in the same way that I think the heroes of movies and maybe previous generations have. I wish that leaders owned their own mistakes in a way that perhaps circumvented future impacts to their companies, their sports teams, their schools, whatever it is they're leading. I wish that they took their mistakes and owned them before the fallout happened that amplified the mistake and ultimately, would end up impacting them anyway, but it would, at least you're containing the casualties, if you will.
Yeah.
I think that's a real blind spot in our current culture. And I wish people invested in their teams. Going back to what we talked about, hiring people smarter than yourself, training the next generation of leaders. I don't know that corporate America takes succession plans as seriously as they should.
Yeah.
I wish that was something that wasn't just taught in business schools. I wish that was a part of, the corporate language. I haven't seen it in the places that I've worked, and I'm certainly not saying that it doesn't exist in my industry, but I have not seen it. And I think we've seen some major Fortune 500 companies where the CEO, even somewhat recently, has stepped down and no one can take their place and they have to come back. And that's a comment on the leader as to why they haven't been able to get the next person or persons up to snuff. I think constant turnover in my industry at a high level is emblematic of that. And we're not helping the organization that we are stewards of, however long it might be. The Weather Channel is a 42-year-old iconic institution. I'm just a temporary steward. And so my job is to keep it healthy and grow the next leaders who are going to take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that, I think, gets back to how you build your culture in your organization. And part of that cultural build is accountability, of course, and some of the key attributes that you're looking for in your personnel. But it's also, and you brought up a really critical point, you have to invest in your people. Right. So that there's that alignment, if you will, between the employee and the organization, but a common vision of where the organization's going and their part, how they play a really important part in that. And part of that plays right into succession planning.
That's exactly it. And, finding both maybe formal and informal ways to grow that talent. Anything from, yes, let's bring in the leadership coaches. Let's bring in experts who can do hands-on tactical training for the next skill set. But then also, can you pair maybe a junior leader with a senior leader? Can you create some shadowing? Can you reorganize a department such that there are more rungs on the ladder such that it's a gradual growth process, and you're not throwing an individual contributor into a senior leadership role right away. We did that at the Weather Channel with one of our business units, and we created new positions to be able to grow them organically rather than set them up for failure. So I do think that's critical.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think it's really, really important. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in the landscape of many businesses today, and I think government, is we're not doing a real good job of that.
I think we could do a lot better.
Yeah. So for the next generation of leaders, what challenges are you seeing emerge today that will probably impact them as they come into the workforce and then they start to move up the ladder?
I think the number one thing starts with being in person. I think COVID has changed not only how we work in America, but also all across the globe, that there is not just a tolerance, but an expectation that we will do things virtually. And while, an interview like what we're doing, we're able to have technology where we can see each other while we're in different cities and be able to talk face to face, if you will, with quotes, that's an appropriate use of virtual technology. But you cannot build a culture on Zooms, Google Meets, Microsoft Teams. You just can't do it. I think I am concerned that there is now an expectation from all workers at all levels that there is some right to be able to work from home all the time. And while I definitely think there's a place for it, and I think that there are many jobs that can benefit from some remote work, there is no substitute for being in person. Yeah. You can't train someone on the softer skills over the phone or over Zoom. You can't really have a difficult conversation in an impactful way without being in person. You can't train the next generation of leaders without it being in person, because there is that human connection that you can't have in a two-dimensional world. And let's face it, companies are selling office space, closing down headquarters. Yes, it saves money, and I appreciate that. And certainly in my industry, there's a lot of headwinds. But there has to be a way to be able to get people in a room. And I'm fortunate that where I work, so much of what we do is on TV, in person, breaking news. We're in person most of the time. But I don't know how you overcome the challenges of succession plans and accountability and taking responsibility without having that in-person interaction, such that people aren't just avatars on a screen, that they're really people. So that would be my concern for sort of the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I know, as a fire chief, I would try and start my day just walking around the office for about 15 or 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and talking to all my staff. And invariably, I would learn something about a challenge that they maybe were facing personally, or, a problem they were having in the office, maybe with somebody else, or just there was a roadblock that I needed to help them remove. Would have never found out about those issues unless we would have had that personal interaction.
That's right.
And we're losing that. We've lost it in many organizations. And I think that is a real challenge. And I think we need to find that balance. I understand the motivation to want to just work from home because it's a lot easier.
Right.
Organizationally, it's not the best formula. So
I would agree with that.
So a final question for you today, Nora. What advice would you give to the next generation in respect to making a difference in their own life journey?
I would say, in terms of leadership, the best approach you can take is recognizing it's not about you. That leading people is about making others better. And as soon as it becomes about you, you are going to be very torn in terms of your motivation and your priorities. I think that listening to all feedback, no matter where it comes from, is really important. I think you'll miss an idea if you only listen to it from certain people or certain rungs on the ladder, if you will. That doesn't mean you have to follow everything, and it certainly doesn't mean you have to take all the advice, but not hearing it is to your detriment. I think that, again, meeting with everybody. I meet with everybody in my organization who reports up to me. So like 200 people, face-to-face every year. They can have 20 minutes, 30 minutes, no agenda. They literally can say whatever they want, as long as it's not abusive. And my only rule is, if you bring up a problem, bring a solution. It might not be the right solution, but at least bring it. Having that interaction with people and giving them a voice so that they know that they're heard and that they're valued is critical. And I cannot tell you how many amazing ideas, plans, strategies have come from those meetings.
Oh, yeah.
I think we've all seen leaders wall themselves off to their contingents of direct reports, and that's to their detriment. So accessibility, transparency. I have a glass office. There is literally no privacy, and I have an open door policy where people are walking in and out all the time. And sometimes, usually that's pretty great, and sometimes not so great, but that comes with the territory, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I think not appearing to be Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, and making decisions by decree, that's just not a path to successful leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the people that are doing the work usually have the best ideas how to fix something if it's not working.
That's right.
And but so often many leaders just don't ever engage them, and it's unfortunate. But the other piece of it, I think, is how you look at leadership. And I've always looked at being in those roles as it's a privilege to be able to be in charge, if you will, but it gives you an opportunity to help people, pursue their own path. And, that's the best gift that we all can receive, is if we help somebody achieve something that they want to do. And so
I agree with you.
Okay.
100%.
Well, Nora, thanks for being on our podcast today. I really appreciate it, and look forward to our continued interaction.
I do too, Randy. Thank you for having me, and thank you for everything you're doing with Leadership Crucible and this podcast. And I think you're making a really big difference at a time when we really need this. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.